Nice to see so many familiar faces. Whenever someone we love dies, our lives are changed forever. We're never the same. We may mark time in terms of before they died and after they died. We may change our direction or steadfastly stick to the same direction in their memory. We might experience ongoing sadness, regret, even guilt at what we've lost in our life. But when we lose someone to suicide, it's all of these things magnified and multiplied many times over. Those bereaved by suicide often say that our loved ones died once and we die 1,000 times over and over again. Some people call the grief from suicide a complicated grief. Iris Bolton, a counselor and suicidologist and a mother who lost her son to suicide, writes in the appendix of her book, My Son, My Son. She says, struggle with why it happened until you no longer need to know why or until you're satisfied with partial answers. She doesn't say until you have any answers, because there aren't any. 15 and a half years ago, my son Jordan took his own life 1 month before his 15th birthday. So you'd think I'd be standing before you now, calm, together. 15 years is a long time. A lot of things have changed. I've changed in many ways. But I still define the events in my life as before Jordan died and after Jordan died. I've given talks at the Bereavement Foundation many times, and each time it's different because each time I'm at a different point in my grief and mourning. But it's never over. So I might cry today. I was hoping I wouldn't, but it's okay because I believe that tears can heal the soul. And I still cry from time to time over Jordan's death. And I likely always will. I knew a couple who worked in a nursing home with seniors in their 80s and 90s, and they told me that many of those people still cried over children they'd lost decades before. So it made me feel a little less crazy for still crying. Crying, allowing oneself to experience deep emotions, is a sign of strength and health, especially when one is grieving. So if you don't get anything else from my talk today, I want you to know that suicide post-vention is not a goal-oriented treatment. There are aspects of goals, but if you have experience with grief therapy, I hope that you know that mourning can be lifelong and that each new loss of any type might bring back some of the grief from some of that old grief. With suicide bereavement, I believe this is even more true. I've learned many things in the past 15 years that I plan to share with you today. And by the way, I didn't learn them easy. Grief and mourning has led me down some strange and unwise and risky paths. I did a lot of dumb things in my grief and mourning. As clinicians and professionals, you need to recognize what things are expressions of grief and what's pathology. It's important to be patient with your clients when they come to you for support in their grief. So I guess the first lesson for me was to forgive myself as much as I could for some of the dumb things I did or didn't do in my grief and mourning, and some of the things that transpired between Jordan and me before he died. It's hard to make wise decisions when you feel your life has suddenly fallen apart. Some counselors recommend not making any major decisions in the first year after losing someone to suicide. Each of us has to figure that out for ourselves. Support your clients in their decisions. Some people move homes right away. Others don't change anything for many years. I still live in my own home, even though it's changed a lot in the past 15 years. But I gave Jordan's clothes away in the first week. I was involved in a support group for a while with people who had lost someone to suicide. Some counselors recommend against groups in the early stages of grief. But let your clients decide what's appropriate for them. I heard people in our group say it helped them even more than individual work to be with other people who understood and shared. In the group, we learned that with suicide, there's more than enough guilt to go around. One of my son's best friends, who my son had always tricked and teased mercilessly, came up to me after Jordan's death and said to me maybe he had teased Jordan too much. I had a counselor who tried to talk me out of my guilt, who tried to tell me that Jordan's death was not my fault. And I told her, don't waste time trying to talk me out of my guilt. I'm here to learn how to live with it. So I try to forgive myself, although I continue living with some aspects of guilt. We never know completely why somebody chooses to kill themselves. But the choice is theirs, and nobody forced them to make that decision. I've heard it said that suicide is a long-term solution to a short-term problem. So I've learned that things always change. We just have to wait. And that brings me to another thing. However someone is feeling now, it will change. Maybe time heals, I don't know. But mostly everything changes with time. So if your client is afraid that he or she is going to feel the same way they feel right now when they first come to you, please assure them it's going to change. I don't know how, but how they feel will change. And if your client feels worse as time goes on and they're not able to function, watch for signs of depression, but beware. Grief looks like depression, but it's not depression. So be sure to use appropriate assessments for depression before treating someone bereaved by suicide. Their symptoms may be temporary. When I find myself getting weepy again and wanting to withdraw and feeling bad about myself, I call my counselor again and I go and talk to her until I can function again. I seek the support of support groups, and I seek the support of understanding friends. Not all friends are understanding. Some will say, oh, geez, I thought you'd be over that by now. Counseling's a good idea, and I think it's a sign of strength to acknowledge that all of us need some help at some point in our lives. So that brings me to the next one. The only way to deal with grief is to allow ourselves to go through it. There's no timetable on mourning. Some people are able to put their loss in its place and move forward with their life sooner than others. So be gentle with your clients and encourage them to be gentle with themselves. A dad who came to our support group with his 2 teens after he had recently lost his wife to suicide said that he'd come to find out how to help his kids get over it. He said he was fine. We told him, you don't get over it. You have to go through it. Well, he left the meeting in a huff with his 2 teens in tow, saying that our group was useless if we couldn't offer him what he needed. On the other hand, we had a group member who attended regularly for some time. She told us that she had not addressed her grief for years until she had a total breakdown and ended up in hospital. She came to our group as part of her healing and dealing with the deaths, and there had been several from suicide in her family. She eventually stopped coming to the group because she'd joined a card-playing group that met on the same night. Life goes on. A man came to our group shortly after we started up, saying that he had been waiting 20 years for this group. He had never had the opportunity to talk to anybody who understood about his sibling's death 20 years before. He came to several sessions until he didn't need to come anymore. One of the women who helped start our support group, who was nearing retirement at the time, had lost her father to suicide when she was a child. Never too late to seek help. She used to tell us that whenever there was a death by suicide in her extended family, and there had been several, her mother insisted that they attend the funeral. Even if they didn't know the family member well, her mother said, we must show them that life goes on. It does, you know. I learned a useful term from a retired social worker who had lost his son to suicide. He talked about grief spasms. Those times when you think your life is moving forward with grief, and all of a sudden you get triggered by something, a song, a smell, something someone says, an event, anything. And you feel like you're right back at the beginning of your grief. But it's just a spasm, and like any spasm, it passes. I still get those grief spasms. And sometimes I don't even know what triggered them. But it's okay. Part of the process. It doesn't mean you haven't moved forward. Don't fight it. Just be with it. It's just a spasm. It passes. So as professionals, if you haven't experienced this yourself, you need to know about this aspect of grief, if only to reassure your clients that it's just a spasm, and also to avoid unnecessarily diagnosing pathology. When Jordan died, I thought I would never laugh again or dance again, and I love to dance or tell jokes. At the first family wedding a few months after his death, I didn't dance, and I left right after the dinner. Slowly, I began to dance again, go out with my girlfriends, sing, even tell jokes. At first, it was hard, and I felt guilty. But it's important to start living again, even though life is different now. So let your clients know this. Several years after Jordan's death, I got involved with someone I met at a grief recovery group. It wasn't the best relationship, but it brought some love into my life. And even he helped me learn something. Because one night he said to me, if the tables were turned and you had died, and you were looking down on Jordan now, would you want him to stop living because of your death? And if he's looking down on you now, do you think he wants you to stop living? Or would he want you to go on and enjoy life? It made me stop and think. So far, I've talked about losing a child or a parent to suicide, but I learned from another member of our support group about the devastation of losing a sibling. You see, she had not only lost her sibling, but in many ways she'd also lost her parents, who were so devastated by their own grief. And the same was true for her sibling, who had found their sibling shortly after the suicide. People at the funeral said to her, you have to be strong for your parents now, but who would be strong for her? So I think that siblings who have lost a sibling to suicide face special challenges that you need to know if they come to you for help. So those are some of the things I've learned. Sometimes I don't even realize how much my life has changed since Jordan's death. And then I take stock and realize how many positive things have happened in my life. And I tell people how blessed I am. I haven't forgot the tragedies, Jordan's death being the worst of them. I've lost close friends to cancer. I've had some negative romantic experiences. I've even lost some close friendships that have dissolved unpleasantly. But I consciously choose to focus on what I have to be grateful for. After Jordan died, I often got together with a close friend who was a father figure in Jordan's life. And we'd talk about Jordan, and he'd say to me, I don't know how you do it. Keep going, that is. And I'd say to him, I don't know how either. But I guess that's the big question in post-vention, is how do we keep going after experiencing such a traumatic event? I was fortunate enough to be sent for training in resiliency with an organization called RERO, Reaching In, Reaching Out, based in Toronto. And they work with professionals who work with children under the age of 8 and their parents. And their work is based on the work of the Penn Resilience Program at the University of Pennsylvania. Both organizations are listed in a bibliography that's in your program, and also the abilities that I'm about to list are on the flip side of that. So their research lists 7 abilities that individuals need to overcome adversities. And although some people seem by temperament to naturally possess these abilities, others, we can all learn and enhance those abilities that we have. The 7 abilities are emotional regulation. This is not about repressing emotions, but learning to express our emotions appropriately. Impulse control. The importance of being able to delay gratification, to be able to wait for what we need, to recognize the value of time. Realistic optimism, the ability to analyze the true cause of events, both within and outside of our control. Empathy, I think we're all familiar with that one. Self-efficacy, a sense of having some impact on some elements in our own life, and reaching out, not only for help and support, but also for new experience and opportunities. Using a cognitive behavioral approach, we can all learn and pass on these abilities. So I encourage you to seek out that research and training so that around resiliency, both for yourself and in your work. I began to realize that I used a lot of these abilities to some degree to survive my son's suicide. I've been grateful for what I have instead of focusing on what I've lost. And on those days when I can only remember the sadness, I make my gratitude list, and this helps me to keep going. So here's some of the things on my list, and you can see how it fits with the resiliency abilities. For 15 years, I had the opportunity to be mom to a great kid, and I have wonderful memories. I'm 67 years old, and I'm in pretty good health despite the normal aches and pains of aging. I've taken advantage of challenging career opportunities that have presented themselves and made my life interesting and rewarding. I'm closer with my siblings now than I ever have been, and I really appreciate their love and support. I have a goddaughter and her partner who add meaning to my life with their love and the love of their 3 children, who are my grand-godchildren, effectively my grandchildren in every way except blood. I've been fortunate enough to travel and see interesting things and meet new people. I've made many new friends who support me and keep me company. They laugh at my bad jokes, and they help me smile, and they even hold me when I cry. And I let myself cry whenever I need to. And I dance as much as I can. Thank you.